Greetings, I'm the man behind the mask, and I would like to talk to you about hockey. Yes, let's talk about hockey, the show that journeys through the history of the sport of ice hockey from its disputed origins to the game we see today. Now, for those of you that are unfamiliar with the game, let's take a quick look at how ice hockey is played today.
In the most basic terms, hockey is a game played on ice in which two opposing teams, using curved sticks, try to shoot a puck into the opponent's goal. Each goal is worth 1 point, and the team with the most points at the end of the game wins. The ice rink for hockey looks like this from an overhead view. The rink contains 2 blue lines, a center red line, 9 face-off circles, and 2 goal lines, goal creases, and goals. The center red line divides the rink in half and, along with the 2 goal lines, is used to judge icing calls, which we'll talk more about later. The blue lines divide the rink into 3 parts called zones. There are the offensive and defensive zones and the neutral zone. These 2 lines are also used to judge if a player is offsides, which we'll also talk about later. There are 9 face-off spots contained in the rink. All face-offs take place at these spots. There are 2 spots in each end zone, 2 at each end of the neutral zone, and 1 in the center of the rink. The face-off circles and hash marks around the center ice and end zone face-off spots show where the players may legally position themselves during a face-off. Lastly, in front of each goal, there is a goal crease. Now, the crease is a special area of the ice where the goaltender can perform his or her duties without interference. In fact, in most leagues, no attacking player may enter the goal crease before the puck does. Now let's move on to the positions of the game. Each team is allowed to have no more than 6 players on the ice at a time. There are 3 forwards, the center, the left winger, and the right winger. Their primary responsibility is to score goals. Then there are the 2 defensemen, whose primary responsibility is to prevent the opposing team from scoring. Finally, there is the goaltender, which is the player that defends his team's goal net by stopping the puck from entering it, thus preventing the opposing team from scoring. Now, because they're throwing themselves in front of speeding pucks, the goaltender wears much more padding and equipment than any other player on the ice. Now that we have our rink and we have our players, we need to know how the rules work. The game is divided into 3 periods, each 20 minutes in length. Each period begins with a face-off at center ice. Now, a face-off is when the 2 teams line up in opposition of each other and the opposing centers attempt to gain control of the puck after it is dropped between their sticks by a referee. Face-offs are also held at center ice after a goal is scored, and are held in any of the other designated face-off spots in order to resume the game after it has been stopped by the referees for any reason. Now, other than scoring a goal, the game may be halted by the referees for a number of reasons, the most common of which are icing, offsides, and penalty calls. Icing is called when a player shoots the puck across the center red line and the opposing team's goal line and the puck remains untouched. After icing is called, the gameplay resumes with a face-off in the defending zone of the team that iced the puck. Now, offsides, on the other hand, is called if a player on the attacking team enters the attacking zone before the puck itself enters the zone, either carried by a teammate or sent into the attacking zone by a teammate. And then there are penalties. Now, penalties can be called for numerous reasons, such as tripping, elbowing, slashing, and of course, fighting. When a penalty is called, the offending player is sent to sit in the penalty box, and his team has to play without him and with 1 less player on the ice than they had before the penalty was called. The team that has taken the penalty is said to be short-handed, while the other team is on what is called a power play. This lasts for 2, 4, or 5 minutes, depending on the severity of the penalty, or until the team on the power play scores a goal, whichever happens to come first. Now, occasionally, if a player is tripped or illegally obstructed in some way by an opponent when there are no defenders except the goaltender between him and the opponent's goal, the player will be granted a penalty shot instead of his team getting a power play. This is the equivalent of giving the player a free shot, as the only thing standing between him and the goal is the goaltender. Now, if at the end of the game the score is tied, one of two things will take place to break the tie: an overtime period or a shootout. Now, an overtime period is just an extra period of gameplay where the first team to score wins. A shootout, on the other hand, is basically a series of penalty shots where the winning team is the team that has scored the most goals after all the players chosen to shoot have shot. Now, depending on the league or event, one or both of these tie-breaking methods may be used. Now that we have a basic understanding of the game, we can take a look back at how this game has developed over the years. Now, no one really knows when or where the game of hockey was first developed, since games between teams hitting an object with curved sticks have been played throughout the world since prehistoric times. Many of these games were developed for fields, though where conditions allowed, they were also played on ice, as shown in 16th century Dutch paintings where a number of townsfolk play a hockey-like game on a frozen canal. Europeans played various versions of hockey-like games prior to coming to the American continent, such as the Scottish sport of shinty and the closely related Irish sport of hurling. Where necessary, these seem to have been adapted for icy conditions as well. Author Thomas Chandler Halliburton wrote of boys from King's College School in Windsor playing hurley on the ice when he was a student there around 1800. These European sports would later combine with the stick and ball games which were already being played by the Micmac Aboriginal natives in Nova Scotia long before the arrival of the English. It wasn't until the mid-1850s that the first recorded hockey games were played, first by Londoners playing on the frozen-over Thames River near the Richmond Bridge, as captured in the March 3, 1855 issue of the Illustrated London News, and then later in the same year by British soldiers stationed in Kingston, Ontario, and Halifax, Nova Scotia around Christmas time. By March 3, 1875, the first organized indoor game was played at Montreal's Victoria Skating Rink between two sides of 9-player teams. This game lasted for 60 minutes and featured the use of a puck instead of a ball to help keep it inside the rink. These games, however, lacked any standard set of rules. So, in an attempt to standardize the sport, students from McGill University in Montreal first published a set of 7 rules in the Montreal Gazette in 1877, based on the rules of field hockey, which later became known as the McGill Rules. These rules would become the foundation for the game of hockey as it is played today. The popularity of the game began to spread after this, and in 1883 the annual Montreal Winter Carnival featured the novel game of hockey, though these games were pretty different from what we see today. For one, the rinks lacked any of the markings seen in today's game. The goal nets were instead 2 poles planted 6 feet apart. The game consisted of 2 30-minute halves as opposed to 3 20-minute periods. 7 players were allowed per side as opposed to 6. The 7th player was known as the rover and, unlike all the other players, did not have a set position and roamed the ice at will, playing offense or defense as was needed. Also, the goaltenders wore much less equipment, and by much less, I mean almost no equipment at all. And perhaps the biggest difference was that forward passing was not allowed. Now, this means that if a player wanted to pass the puck to a teammate, he could only pass it to a teammate that was either beside him or behind him. He could not pass it to any teammate that was in front of him. Now, this rule was in place to favor individual stick handling as the key means of carrying the puck forward. In June of 1888, Queen Victoria appointed Lord Stanley of Preston to be Governor-General of Canada. During his first winter, he and his family attended the Montreal Winter Carnival and instantly became avid hockey fans. By 1892, he wrote, "There does not appear to be any outward or visible sign of the championship at present, and considering the interest that hockey matches now elicit, and the importance of having the games fairly played under generally recognized rules, I am willing to give a cup that shall be annually held by the winning club." The cup itself was purchased by an aide on a trip to England for slightly less than $50, and would go on to become not only a symbol for the game, but the most coveted and difficult-to-win sporting trophy of all time.